Good evening and welcome to the University of York, and specifically to our online event series Behind the Scenes. This has been developed and designed in partnership with our student union YUSU, and I want to especially thank the student union president Patrick O'Donnell for all his support in getting the series off the ground. So my name is Joan Concannon, and I want to extend a very warm welcome to Joe Walker, film editor extraordinaire and alumnus and honorary doctorate of the University of York. We absolutely love showcasing the work of our global alumni community, and I'm delighted that Mary Howarth, our Director of Philanthropic Partnerships and Alumni Engagement, will also give tonight's vote of thanks for the proceedings. This series is part of our York Ideas platform of online events, and as a university for public good, we are really passionately committed to engaging with as many different audiences as possible. We often encourage our students at the University of York to try something new, and we hope very much that this series will enable all of you to experience something new and that you enjoy the journey with us. I'm particularly delighted that tonight's event explores the fascinating but perhaps less well-known world of film editing and how integral it is to the overall success and coherence of any film. Behind the Scenes aims to do just what it says in the tin. We want to give you the opportunity to explore professions and industries that are less visible to the public, to give you an insight into jobs you might never have imagined. And in the context of tonight, I'm so pleased to explore film editing. When actress Lupita Nyong'o won an Oscar for her amazing work on 12 Years a Slave, she gave a heartfelt thanks to the invisible performer, editor Joe Walker. And so I'd like to invite my lovely and amazing colleague, Dr. Ed Brayman from Theatre, Film and Interactive Television, to take forward tonight's conversation with Joe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joan, and good evening, everyone. And Joe, would you like to light up your screen, please? Live from Hollywood Hills, I understand. Yes.
that sounds like something from a Monty Python film.
I'm just going to do the brief rundown just so people can contextualise. I'll keep it quite quick. Graduated from the University of York in 1984. Graduated in music. Sound editor at the BBC. Quickly graduated after making various animal noises on films to cutting dramas, major dramas like The Lakes and so on, and then into movies. And then, of course, major movie relationships with two of the most important filmmakers working today, Steve McQueen, Denis Villeneuve. A couple of Academy Award nominations, three BAFTA Award nominations, quite a few gongs. Not a bad career for a bloke who started from where? Where did you come from originally, Joe?
Sunny Ealing, west of London.
and now you're in the Hollywood Hills.
They used to call it the Queen of the Suburbs.
I want to pick up to start this, Joe, on that quotation that Joan just used from Lupita Nyong'o from when she gave her acceptance speech for the Best Supporting Actress for 12 Years, which also won Best Picture that year. The invisible performer in the cutting room. I think it throws into relief a fundamental question I want to put to you. There are people who think that editing is a technical job. Splice it together, whack it out, off it goes. It's not, is it? What's your conception of the job of the editor, Joe?
It's it embraces so many different things. I mean, it's different for different editors. I mean, the editor of an animation has got a particular set of disciplines. An editor of a documentary, I think, it's got a different set of disciplines. But at heart, you're in the still center of a turning world, and that involves receiving material from sound department, from the composer, from the camera department, obviously, and absorbing all those and ordering them and making a computer project out of it and then editing it. That's the basic job. But obviously it involves sensitivity to the best of all of those departments. And that involves, of course, a sensitivity to storytelling, big time. That's the number one priority. And to performance. And, you earn your trust over the years by being good in the performances you select, and your knowledge of what the performers have done. I mean, it's very important. Sometimes 6 months into cutting a film, and you kind of want to try a different tack on the character's journey, and maybe, you know, there's a big shouty argument at some point, and you kind of remember the fact that there was a discarded take long ago that was quieter, a little bit more restrained, and maybe not full kind of octane. So it's amalgamating all of those things. I mean, when I went to school, I don't know, do they still have A-levels? Yeah, okay, well, when I was 17 and sitting A-levels, I did English, art, and music, and that sort of shows that I couldn't really make up my mind which of those three disciplines meant the most to me. I mean, it was good enough to study music at York, thank God I went there. But I mean, editing combines all of those three to a great degree.
And just take me through the sort of cycle of it, because again, there's this perception that as the editor arrives at sort of the end of the process and all this stuff has been gathered and they sit at the bench and they throw it all up in the air. The reality is that the editor is much more involved through the entire creative process than that. Can you give me a sort of a sense of the length of the engagement that you would expect to have on a movie where you're playing a major role?
Well, I mean, I can talk about in terms of the last film, June, where I was aware that Denny, I've worked with Denny 3 times before we worked on June. That was our 4th film together. We did 2 films back to back. Sicario and Arrival had 1 weekend in between. So to be honest, one of the kind of biggest adjustments of working online, as many of us are now doing, is the fact that I'm seeing the front of his face, which is very odd to me because normally he sits over there and the right-hand side of his face is like the dark side of the moon to me. I have never seen it. And there he is staring at me from his laptop in Montreal. That's how we cut June. But sorry, I digress. So on that one, I knew that we were doing June because, you know, I'm in his company all the time and I'm aware of the kind of conversations to a small degree of what's going on in his future. And I read the book. I didn't read the book when I was young. I saw the David Lynch film, I think, in the cinema. So I'm thinking about it. That's nearly a year before the first day of filming. Before filming, I would have looked at scripts and chipped in some thoughts and kind of feelings about it, if there was something negative or positive to kind of react to. You know, sometimes there's things that editors pick up on that others don't pick up on. Like, for example, the flow of time is very important to editors and to me, of course. And so sometimes you're aware that there's like an endless night, or there's just one endless morning, or that's the longest day in history. And then suddenly there's a night scene and a morning scene. You go, hey, how long was that day? And these are just little small things. And there's also, a script is not a film. I mean, a script gets you there on day one with lights and camera and action, and fully cast and with a great director. But, you know, you can say things in a script that don't work in a film. Like, for example, you're repeatedly looking at the character's name. So if you've got a film, you'll constantly see, you know, Bill, and then his dialogue, and then Ted, and then Ted's dialogue. And if somebody refers to Bill in the third, you know, about somebody else in the film, you might remind them that actually nobody knows who Bill or Ted is. Unless, of course, it's a film called Bill and Ted's Great Adventure, which is why it's such a bad example I gave you there. But anyway, but you get my point. There are things that happen in a script that, and you just don't know. It's an experiment. It's kind of like cooking. You know, you get all your ingredients on set, and you try some things out which are going to fail. You try some things out where you reap much more than you need. I mean, I could do almost a feature-length version of Ryan Gosling's character Kay being interviewed in Blade Runner. They did this long improvisation, which was a kind of modernization of the Voight-Kampff test for fans. And I have such kind of great versions of that where it just goes on and on and on. And it's like torture. But so I would be involved I start cutting the day after the first day of filming. And normally on June, I was in Budapest where we filmed, and I was there prepped, ready 2 or 3 weeks beforehand. And the reason for that was to test the systems, and we're trying some new things and some old things, to hire some people. And also because previs, on a VFX heavy film, you would probably be editing the previs, and that's very important because the length of time you hold a shot, even if it's just a cheap, well, relatively cheap version of that shot, is important, because that's the difference between, if you hold Rachel in Blade Runner for 1 second longer, you're talking about another $100,000. So it's kind of important for them to be able to budget based on the fact that you're holding this for a long time or a short time. Whether you need those shots, sometimes, you know, there are things that are storyboarded and they're tryouts, and Daniel would want to see whether it works in context. And he'll say, no, actually, I don't need it. So there's, you know, substantial scenes in June where there was a very heavy VFX component, where we worked pretty laboriously for 2 weeks to kind of prep those sequences before they filmed the principal action, which is the actors in you know, against the green screen or whatever it may be.
So we'll play a clip, or at least a promo from June in a moment, Joe. But one of the things I just want to pick out from that is extensive involvement in the logistical setting up of the film, in the storytelling of the film, before you even, as it were, put blade to celluloid or the digital equivalent. How much freedom do you enjoy in that process, generally speaking? You know, now, because you're a very senior and highly respected editor, or throughout your career, have you always felt you've had a freedom to manipulate and change and tell stories the way you want?
Well, I've always been very gobby. So I don't think I ever held myself back. I mean, in fact, I think I got a job because I was so forthright about what I didn't like about a script. I loved the script and I loved the project, but there was one thing about it which I thought was incredibly homophobic, actually. That's what I rejected. And in a bar in Soho, I tried to persuade the director to have another look at that. And he ended up having me kind of try and postulate what should happen in this sequence. And anyway, I think that actually got me the job because I had a strong opinion. I think picking a script is really, really important, you know, thing. I mean, it's the director, picking the director and picking the script are the two most important things.
And we're going to talk, that sort of takes us into sort of notion of relationships. But I think some of the audience might appreciate now just seeing a little bit of Dune, one of the most long-awaited movies of some considerable time. So I'm going to share my screen, which I hope will bring up Dune in a minute. All right, so let's just watch this. This is the promo. Obviously, you know, this is all we're allowed to see at the moment until when? October, isn't it, Joe?
Yes, October.
Okay. Here we go.
There's something happening to me. There's something awakening in my mind. I can't control it.
What did you see?
There's a crusade coming.
Do you often dream things that happen just as you dreamed them?
Yes.
The test is simple. Remove your hand from the box, and you die.
What's in the box?
Pain. You inherit too much power. You have proven you can rule yourself. Now you must learn to rule others. Something none of your ancestors learned.
My father rules an entire planet.
He's losing it.
He's getting a richer one.
He'll lose that one too. Arrakis is a death trap.
I'll kill him. This is an extermination. They're picking my family off one by one.
Let's fight like demons.
An animal caught in a trap will gnaw off its own leg to escape. What will you do?
I know you.
One day, the legend will be born. All of civilization depends on it.
The future. I can see it. I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer.
My Lord Duke.
Where the fear is gone, only I will remain.
Go, go, go!
Yay!
Or wasn't. But Joe, just before we go into some of the questions that have come in, just one question about that in particular. I mean, I know you can't talk in detail about Dune, but there's a lot in that promo that, you know, it refers to the sort of stuff you were talking about, these big, thinking about all the effects and animatics and so on. Is there anything about that clip that you can tell us that can give us some insight into the process of making Dune, Joe? Or is it still top secret?
I feel like, you know, Roy Batty talking about, you know, having seen, you know, these fantastic things and unable to kind of tell it to anybody. I feel like, but the world building in that film is incredible. And that, you know, it's slow, patient work and a very visionary director. But working with his, you know, very talented production team and VFX team, production design and VFX, you know, these things work up from somewhere I keep as a little memento. I've got a little post-it note where Denny, I was asking Denny, how big do you want the spaceship to be in Arrival? And he did this fun little, like, half circle and two little dots for the people underneath. And I kept that as a reminder that actually sometimes an idea for a shot starts that simple and then gets worked up until the textures are developed. And I've seen that process through. Denny's obviously kept an eye on the VFX every single day for, well, in my company, 22 months. It's a long time to work on something, but that's the level of detail and attention that this is given, and frankly, passion, which is what it's all about. There's a passion for this world that I hope people will see in October.
We'll pick up a little bit on the relationship with Denis Villeneuve in a moment. I want to pick up one question because it flows from our earlier conversation about freedom and things like that. Mason asked, do you ever edit with a script beside you? Is it so marked up, ready for you? What is the actual nitty-gritty process of manoeuvring, as it were, from the rushes and the plates onto the editing machine with the Avid or whatever? Do you actually literally go by numbers, or how does it work?
No, I mean, technically, everything is organized based on the numbering of a script. So if it's scene 89, then a slate will be slate. In American system, it's slate 89, then 89A and 89B. They're three different setups for one scene, and then you'll have takes written after that. So the script looms large over the way that we organize things. But by that stage, I've learned the script pretty much the way that an actor does. I mean, you have to be really familiar with the script as an editor because things are shot out of order. So, you know, you have to remember that Solomon Northup is whipped one day and the next shot is of him trying to get to sleep. And it's helpful to remember that he's just, you know, he's going to be uncomfortable. So, you know, you have to kind of have a memory of that. And in the past, I've even written little cards up on the wall just to kind of have a visual reference. It makes it easier if you're changing the order, not to commit to it, but just to kind of think it through. So the script looms large, but once it's filmed, it's no longer a script. It's you know, David Lynch has a great line about this, where an interviewer is trying to ask him to explain Mulholland Drive, and he just said, "Look, I've just spent 5 years turning a script into a film, and now you want me to turn it back again." And I feel like that it's, you know, once it's got, there are things that you cannot imagine from a script. They're always and often way better than my limited imagination can kind of conceive. I mean, for example, working with Michael Fassbender, which I've done numerous times, and each time he just brings something that you couldn't quite anticipate. It's mercurial. So it's a living, breathing thing by the time it's dailies in front of me. So my relationship with the script sort of ends there. I'm just tackling with what they've done with it.
You once used a phrase which leads me to another interesting question, and it probably dovetails us back into Villeneuve. You once used a phrase about yourself that the manipulation of time was your superpower and probably the editor's superpower. And there's a question here: what is the most interesting cue you've read in the script to denote the passage of time for those of us learning to produce screenplays who want to avoid forced montages? Is there some particular moment of managing time that either you've discovered or seen in a script, then you thought, that gives me the chance to exercise my superpower?
Yeah, I mean, if I see the word dissolve, you know, that's the typical thing, isn't it? It's very funny. It's a kind of, there's a whole kind of hidden world here. You know, scripts, the best of them are a tool by which you raise the project off the ground, I would say. And part of that is not necessarily going to end up on screen. You know, there are many, many things that you can't, you can say in words, you can't show in film unless it's quite elaborate. I mean, a friend of mine was writing a script and he was saying the guy's meant to be the best hairdresser in town. How do you visualize what the best hairdresser is in town? You can't do, I mean, one haircut isn't going to sell you, is it? I mean, does he have reviews? Lots of customers, you know, a montage of the cash register going. Anyway, there are things in scripts, but those really clever writers, I think, get these things commissioned, you know, by making it a real page turner. And sometimes the pace of their writing and the pace of their description and the pace of the dialogue writing really dictates what the feel of how well it trips, how fast you turn a page. The real awkwardness is when a script is kind of an action script, is often very hard to read because the detail goes past in a blur. If you're in the middle of watching a chase sequence in Indiana Jones, you know, the description is like not what you're there for. You're there for a kind of, you know, so it is a real art, I think, in a script to convey pace. It's very, very hard to do. Time for me, I mean, you know, and also some of it is a little bit deceptive because there have been scripts that I've worked on where it's a real page turner, but then when you get to look at the whole thing as a first assembly, you know, the film is never as promising as its script and its dailies, but it's often never as disappointing as it is when it's put together for the very first time. It's part of the psychology of working with a director that I know that things are going to move on from there, and that's something to react to. The first assembly, by the way, for those that aren't familiar with that, the idea is when you finish shooting, normally the director goes away to a spa for a week, and then you're left to kind of do a first pass of the whole story, sort of as it was intended, as it was in script order. At that stage, you would probably want the fullest version of the film. So it could have some sections that you know are way too long, and you could put a kettle on and make a cup of tea during and come back, it would still be on. It would, you know, there is, it's a kind of warts and all version. And it can be very, very depressing for a director to see it because that's not their vision. You then have to work, normally, to pick up an earlier question, I would work intimately with a director for 10 to 12 weeks to do a director's cut, although I don't really believe that exists anymore because it's always, you know, as long as the director's there, it's always the director's cut. There's no editor's cut. I mean, it's like, and then, you know, you work on things and you pummel it and you change it and you rewrite it. And as I said, it sort of combines an interest in English art and music and Part of that is rewriting little, what they call ADR lines, and retooling, maybe voiceover even we've used in Arrival. We did a documentary section in that to explain some things that weren't clear from the script and from what was filmed. So it's a long process, it's a long process of evolution in the cutting room. It's kind of like another rewrite, basically.
Let's talk about, because you've raised this idea of working with a director over a period of time. You've worked with two notable directors, and we've already started to talk about Villeneuve. What is that relationship actually like? First of all, he must be a friend by now. And does that friendship, how does that work as a creative relationship?
Yeah, I mean, you can't spend that much time together without getting on enormously well, and, kind of depend on each other like friends and brothers, really. And, we're in it, but so there's a really nice balance with Steve and with Denny. It's very focused on the work. I mean, we don't sit around. I mean, that is the sofa that Denny sits on, but he rarely puts his feet up. It's not a confessional. It's not a kind of therapy session always. But yeah, you work together a lot. You spend a lot of time together. And
take me into one of those moments, Joe. You're working on. We've got a clip coming up from Arrival, which may help here. And do tell me when you want to cue it in. But yeah. There's a sense. You've got a director sitting there. You're working away at the Avid with your material. You're finessing it from this. Through. Just take me inside that process. How do you work together? Is it just a chat, or is there something else going on?
Well, the best directors don't tell you where to cut. I mean, it's a bit like the best directors don't tell an actor how to say a line. They don't go up and say, "Could you say to be or not to be?" It's they kind of give you direction. Can you do it through your gritted teeth? Actually, Denny said that. I heard the first time I worked with him on Sicario, I heard him coaching an actor to do a little line, which was a wild track. It was something where the radio mic had sort of lost contact with the unit, and they had to do it again. And it was a guy just looking in the mirror and saying, "This guy," or something like that. It was a very small line. And I just heard Denny's direction to the actor. It really charmed me, because it was like three very, very distinct, playful ways of getting of directing an actor to give a line. So I kind of knew I was with a master, really, at that moment. That was a kind of eye-opening moment. And typically you respond to the problem. So for example, this clip I'll set up in Arrival, for those that don't know it, it's about, language and aliens and time. And we had a long kind of bit of story tubing that needed to get kind of shortened. It felt like not nutritious tension, if you know what I mean. It's kind of like high carbohydrate tension. And the trouble is that if we took that piece of tubing out of the story, which made the whole film work better without it, you missed one very vital thing, which is the key actually to unraveling the whole film as you go along, which is a thing called the Sapphire War Theory. And if you cut the beginning of this piece of tubing out, then you lost that concept. And the concept is basically that learning a language can rewire your brain. It's a theory. And it's the basis that the idea that being in contact with these aliens and learning their language has somehow retooled Louise's brain, Amy Adams' character's brain. So we have this kind of like problem, and like in a normal situation, we have a scene where this is expressed, and it was a scene where Forrest Whitaker's character, the general, had come round with Ian, her kind of co-worker, and they're very concerned about her because she looks ill. And they're saying basically, are you okay? And at the end of the scene, as soon as you cut to Forrest Whitaker at the foot of her bed, he sort of says, "You're benched. You just need to take it easy. We're playing a long game here. Ian is going to take over." And that was the beginning of the tubing. So as soon as you cut to Forrest Whitaker in that scene, you were down the rabbit hole of a scene. So with Denny, it was like in a normal thing, we've said, well, look, how do we get that scene back? And I say, well, in a normal situation where you don't kind of quite trust to the process and trust each other, I think you just say, well, it's not going to work. We can't, once you get into that scene, you can't get out of it. And then that day, Denny just said to me, well, why don't we just put together the bits we need? And like, instead of like objecting to the futility of that project, I did. And what came out of it was really magical. It was also a day when we got the first test of the heptapod walking, which was kind of, it didn't have the top part. It was just a test to see how the legs were meant to move. And they'd done it rather beautifully through a mist, which I thought was gorgeous. And we saw it was the very first time we saw the heptapod move in a test. And it was had such a strong atmosphere. So, I mean, you can see the scene. We'll stop and have a look at the scene. But basically, we cut together the sections that we felt we needed for the film and to try and see what it was like. And then it just magically worked exactly like that. Instead of Forrest Whitaker, we cut to something else. Let's have a look.
Doing some reading about this idea that if you immerse yourself into a foreign language, that you can actually rewire your brain.
The Sapphire War hypothesis. The theory that it's the theory that the language you speak determines how you think, and
yeah, it affects how you see everything. It was. I'm curious. Are you dreaming in their language?
I mean, I've had a few dreams, but I don't think that makes me unfit to do this job.
So, a scene from Arrival. Your relationship with Villeneuve, defined by these sort of, increasingly by science fiction films in a sense, isn't it? Your relationship with Steve McQueen is a different sort of relationship, equally strong. How would you distinguish between your relationship between Villeneuve and McQueen, if that's not too invidious a question?
There's more that unites them, honestly. We work exactly the same way together, and they're both very, it's intense working relationships that, they take a lot of concentration and time and your best ideas. And, I started with Steve, can't quite remember when we started, a long time ago, over 10 years, I think.
2008.
Oh, wow, there you go. When we started, we were actually in a cutting room in Soho. It was a basement, really. It was a genuine damp Soho basement. I had no assistant. It was, I bought my own lunch, and it was old SCSI drives all stuck together, and they kept collapsing. And we found out a week or two into working there that the rather kind of oppressive atmosphere of the place might be because a very famous writer, Polidori, killed himself in that room. So it was, and it was a very short schedule. We worked on Hunger. I think I kind of really, that was a film that really gave me a leg up, and I'd done a lot of great work up until that point. I'd gone up through the BBC, and then I left and gone freelance, and I worked with really great filmmakers in the UK, like Mark Munden, who's a brilliant director. And so I was very happy with the way things were going, but that was a film that just really pushed it close. I always wanted to work on a cinematic film, you know, and Steve totally got that out of the gate on his first debut film. So, you know, it's kind of and also connection with an audience, because it was in Uncertain Regard in Cannes, and it was an amazing experience to go and see it with an audience that were just, you know, enthralled by it.
Well, one thing I want to ask you about working in The Queen, which hopefully the audience will be interested in if they've seen the films, is he's notable for the occasional long take. There's a famous long take in Hunger, 17 minutes of Liam Cunningham talking to Michael Fassbender as Bobby Sands. There's a scene in Shame where Kerry Mulligan is singing the song, and it just goes off, you know, continues. And of course, you know, and in Widows, the most recent collaboration, there's that scene in the gym which goes on with this long Steadicam shot. Is it frustrating as an editor when a director does that and you can't get a knife in, Joe? Or how do you handle that? Or is it actually part of the process, just understanding that's where the vision works through?
I think, I mean, that's one of the kind of great things about working on Steve's films is when you know, he doesn't typically shoot what people call coverage. You know, this idea that you shoot a wide version of the film and increasingly closer versions of the film, and maybe you have, you know, one person talking to another, so you end up with different shot sizes on one person, then different shot sizes on the other that they're talking to, reverses. I mean, it's, you know, it's kind of closer to the New Wave aesthetic, you know, French New Wave kind of thing, where you shoot down one line and you try and get it, he tries to get it in one shot. You know, that's the aim, that's the noble aim, is to try and get a sequence. So, for example, Michael Fassbender chasing Chiwetel Ejiofor, you know, around the yard in 12 years. That was intended, it didn't end up, but it was intended as one shot. And of course, there's a couple of very sustained shots in that. The whipping sequence is like a remarkable thing. It doesn't always suit every story. It doesn't suit every film. I mean, the thing about some of those films where we've done that is that they are kind of more intimate portraits, and often with a smaller cast. You know, Shame and Hunger were pretty much about one person or one or two people. As an editor, it's a great interplay, because when your cut falls after 17 minutes, it better be in a good place. I mean, you know, and at that, there was also a technical difficulty at the time that we were projecting on film, and a film reel is 20 minutes, most people know. There's a changeover between one projector and another that happens after approximately 20 minutes. And I didn't really want the projectionist to be in control of that cut. So, you know, trying to kind of, it affects everything about filmmaking. At the time, we had to have special, you know, it was 2 per 35mm in order to be able to have those long takes. But in terms of my relationship with it, it's something that you get to kind of really manipulate. You know, you can hold on something a long time and really get to look, and then bam, you know, cut hard. And sometimes, you know, my relationship with sound helps shape those kind of moments. It's kind of, I've referred to it as landscaping. I can't think of a better way of explaining how an attitude towards pace. You know, and it's not always slow, by the way. I mean, if it was all slow, it would be boring. It's kind of sometimes very fast, sometimes too fast. For example, most people talk about the hanging scene in 12 Years a Slave, where, you know, there's a very prolonged wide shot where Solomon Northup is less dangling from a tree, and he's, you know, tiptoeing in the mud. And it's an incredibly painful shot, and with people drifting out of their kind of work cottages in the background, going to work and ignoring it. It's kind of startling as an image. It's in the book as well, and it's kind of an amazing piece of writing from Solomon Northup, where he says he would swap a year of his life to be under the shade of a different tree. But very moving and very, you know, that was the intention. And Steve and Sean Bobbitt, his cameraman, had discussed that shot before because they'd had an experience filming something called Western Deep in a very deep mine in South Africa, where they noticed that people just avoided eye contact and sort of went around anybody who looked privileged or white in that situation was kind of they avoided, you know, kept their heads down. And he thought that that would be brilliant in this context. But the truth is, yes, it's held for an awkward long time. I mean, it's held for long enough to make the kind of audience want to get up and shout with the kind of unfairness of it, the injustice of it. But as you're getting there, if you look at it, it's kind of quite fast getting in there and quite fast getting out of there. I didn't show all of the stuff they shot of him being tied up and dragged. I just showed glimpses of it. And when he's cut down, it doesn't show him drop. It cuts hard to him on a floor later. And time, you know, I find cutting with Steve, it's like there are all these opportunities to say something about time, to make things, you know, to juxtapose two times hard with a very hard edge. I mean, I love cutting that material. It's far from it being a frustration. It's a kind of gift.
We've just been talking about particular moments in movies, and some of those are amongst the most resonant memories of my movie going. But one of the people on the chat has asked about your favourite moment of editing, and is it one of your own, or is there a moment of your knowledge of cinema and thinking about the work of editors in general, which for you defines the craft of an editor? You think, I wish I'd cut that, or is it perhaps something of your own?
Well, right now, I mean, on my Instagram page, I kind of featured a TikTok video somebody put up, which I thought had a remarkable cut in it. I mean, the obsession about cutting is not about the cut, I don't think. I mean, I was asked this the other day, and, you know, finding the right spot for that moment, it's important, but it's, you know, we don't compliment Fred Astaire for being able to stand upright. I mean, it's a basic level thing of being able to dance, right? It's kind of, you'll find a place. What's really important is, to me, is the kind of more horizontal thing. The vertical cut, you'll find a really good place, and it's fun to find a good place to go between one thought and another thought. But it's much more, to me, the concentration is on telling the story and how, you know, what do we show? You know, how do we, is that angry version of the argument more effective in the storytelling terms than the quiet version, where you really see he hates her or she hates him, whatever it is? It's like, you know, how valuable is it at that point in the story to tell these things? You always have to discard things to make one better point. So it's kind of, to me, that's the kind of thing that engages me and Denny and Steve for days and days and days, is to say, what can we discard that is boring, maybe, or is confusing, or is distracting. There's a really good example in Shane, which I've talked about, where they shot this beautiful sort of Jules et Jim sequence outside the Standard Hotel, and where they hail a cab, and it was in between a section where Brandon's sister is flirting with Brandon's boss, and we kind of feel like it's going to get more and more drunken and a bit out of it. And then there was this scene where they walked past the skaters and hailed a cab, and then he cut to a cab and his boss is kissing his sister right next to him. It's an awkward, horrible, awkward moment. And there was one time, dear Steve, God bless him, because it must have been a big effort to shoot that thing at 3 a.m. in the freezing cold. And I just said, look, can we try it without that scene in the middle? It's like the audience knows where it's going. And it's like so satisfying to cut to it like that. You know, Brandon looking out the window and New York flashing past, and he wishes he wasn't there. It's so much more effective than that little bit in the middle. That's shaping a story. It's not just about the vertical cut. It's how do we express this story the best we can?
I want to move to some very good questions on here. We were going to play some clips and some stuff from Blade Runner 2049, but I think some of these questions might throw out some even more interesting material, if it's okay.
I think it might be more interesting.
You were talking about landscaping before and working with sound. One of the questioners has asked your workflow with working with a composer, and of course you're a composer yourself, so you're very tuned to this. What can you tell us about working with a composer? I mean, can you tell us anything about working with Hans Zimmer on Dune, for example, or is that the exception or the rule?
I've worked with Hans since the late 1980s when we were very lucky to have him on it was an extraordinary show on the BBC called, originally it was called The Gore Saga, and it ended up being called Firstborn. And it was about a half man, half gorilla. And I believe it or not, it was 15, 16 million people watched it. It was kind of, World Cup football kind of figures in the day, seeing this drama. And a very inspirational director who really encouraged me. I was very young. I was in my 20s. So anyway, I did a lot of work. I was the sound editor on that show. And of course, I went round to Hans' studio, and he had a place in Lily Yard in Fulham, right near the football ground. And he was playing the music. He played me this session he'd recorded. It's a tiny little studio, and he crammed all these string players in it. And he played me what they'd done, and it was so loud that the screen in the middle was being magnetized. I couldn't see the image. It was just breaking up like some terrible thing. So he's always had, he's always been big. And the score was fantastic. I love the way that he thought in film terms. He's a great collaborator because I'm a musician, so I kind of could talk to him about, D minor until the cows come home. But much more importantly is really saying, talking about what music can bring that isn't there on screen already. And he totally gets that. Many of the films that we've done together, he's quite restrained. He isn't there all the time. In June, maybe a bit more, is much more epic kind of thing.
And Joe, can I ask, how does it work? And is there any consistency to this? Is it the commission composer rise with tracks and you put them on? Or is it Joe and Hans and Denis sit down and discuss things? What's the actual workflow? This is a very important creative process, how sound and music and vision combine. So can you take us a little bit through the nitty-gritty of that?
Well, he came on to Blade Runner relatively late, very late. We'd struggled up until that point, and we knew that we were in trouble. We only had a short amount of time. And then we went round, I phoned him up and said, Hans, can you help? And he said, my dear boy, I'm going off, tomorrow to do a world tour. So I said, don't go anywhere. And me and Denny went round and showed him the film. We kicked his door down effectively. And he said, well, I can tell you what it's missing. At that stage, it had little bits of Johann's music, and it had little bits of, I think, some temp music, but not very much. Very, very little music actually in it at all. But he was saying what it needs is, and he had his computer, he had his keyboard ready to go. We'd watched the film together, and me and Denny are like going, oh, please help. And he thumbed out this tune that goes da dee da dum, da 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 dee da. And he said, you need this like Mahler, thing of it being a long melody that never resolves. It's always aiming somewhere it doesn't get. And you kind of going, yes, that's exactly, it's very hard with a long inner workings of a soul kind of story like that, not to have something that expresses that musically. Am I allowed to swear on this webcast?
Go on.
He said such a great thing on June is because, he's always looking for that little brick that he can build that then can get, it can develop into a massive orchestral piece. But at the heart, it's, like Inception, da dee da dee, it's 4 notes. It's a tiny little unit. And he was searching for something on the keyboard. And I, I think Denny asked him, what are you looking for? And he said, I'm looking for something as effective as the word. And you think about it, it's like, there's all these incredible stories about nuns who say the word on their deathbed or having a stroke. It's totally universal, and it expresses many things. It can express love. I fucking love you, Ed. It can express hate. It can express so many things. It can go anywhere, which is exactly what, as a composer, he needs. He needs a little unit that can become a chase sequence, that it can become a nightmare sequence, that it can become a love theme, and connect with other little bricks. That's how he builds these things. I mean, in a way, it's in the tradition of German classical music, honestly. The small ingredient, or maybe the works of Sibelius or Janacek is a good example. Somebody who, gives, comes up with da, 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 and then that expanded into 40 minutes of sinfonietto. It's the same concept.
One of the questions that's come up on the chat, and it's probably an inevitable question given many of the audience, is what's your advice? What's your advice about becoming an editor? Your route, university, music, sound editing trainee at BBC and so on. Questions like, do they cut lots of stuff on YouTube and hope it all comes together? What's your advice to the aspirant young editor?
I don't think it's ever been easy to find the way. Really, it's kind of, and it's, once you're there, it's still then a lifelong engagement with this. It's not, it doesn't end the day you get a job. I mean, in my case, honestly, it was tricky. I was working in a place where I was, packaging boxes at the BBC as a temp, and trying to find some way to find somebody who worked in the cutting rooms. There were these amazing cutting rooms in Shepherd's Bush where they were making all these crazy arts documentaries at the time. And the only contact I had was I had a friend who was a fellow temp who was working in the photocopying room, whose boss had a daughter who was part-time working in a cutting room. And I followed that lead, and thank God Linda gave me the chance to come and sit with them. And I sat in the corner of a cutting room where they were making a film about the writer Italo Calvino. And we were all sitting around drinking tea, and I was reading his books in the back of the room. And then suddenly he died. So it suddenly went from being, a leisurely 6-week experience to being a kick, bollock and scramble. And I'd learned some things, and I could, help, at least go and get them a cup of tea. So, I think you have to think like that still. Is like you have to kind of just knock on whatever door you find. And there's, don't take no for an answer. I think the opportunities now for filmmaking are perhaps easier because you can film on an iPhone. Maybe maybe it becomes diminishing returns if you do, but it's like there are some great films shot on an iPhone in recent years.
Tangerine.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite films. I absolutely love that filmmaker. Florida Project is some parts of it are iPhone, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, it's possible. I mean, I think you need to get in a gang and find people sort of, with fellow travelers in that route. And don't give up. I mean, it is, you can get experience. There are, nowadays you can go and see people like me talking and meet other people who want to know about it. And there are events everywhere. ACE runs a course, for example, and of course there are great schools like University of York. It has quite a good department, and there's always a way, right? I mean,
on that point, Joe, just to clarify, because a lot of young editors sometimes think it's about the software. Do I know my way around an Avid or Premiere or Final Cut or whatever it is? It's not about the software. Does that matter at all?
I always say if it was shot on wet string and I wanted to cut it, I'll cut it. It shouldn't matter. I mean, the truth is, professionally speaking, you're arming yourself very well if you know Avid, because Avid is kind of, pretty much used ubiquitously. And it's a really rock solid, it's a rock solid thing. But we're just talking about, it's a bit like a sushi chef. You don't talk about the knives, well, you talk about the fish. And the quality of the expertise of the chef. It's kind of it shouldn't matter what knife I use. But yeah, Adobe and Avid, anything that begins with A is probably worth investigating.
It's about storytelling, not button pushing, isn't it, in the end?
I think that's way more important. And if you can and there are different types of storytelling, cutting a TikTok video and getting, people hooked in 5 seconds, and cutting a YouTube where there's nobody ever breathes, and I'm not saying that's bad. I mean, I watch it like everybody else, and I find it very entertaining. But it's an art, it's a skill of knowing how to do it. Short films, work with others. There's great short film contests all over the place.
Joe, I think we're coming towards the end of this, but I want to ask you the final, probably most invidious question of all. You've cut over a dozen movies, numerous pieces of television. You said to me the other day, you still reckon you've got at least 10 more major movies in you. One hopes many more. But let me ask, when you reflect back over this career, you know, the awards, the nominations, the remarkable creative relationships, is there a moment you've cut, seen on screen and thought, you know what, I could have done that better?
Oh God, yes. Oh God, yeah.
Share a good one.
I'm still, I mean, there was, you know, there's bits in, there's a scene in Blade Runner, which I wish I'm still looking at it just going, God damn it, if I just take that, you know, I don't know. I mean, I don't navel gaze like, I mean, it's always forward like a shark with your mouth open, I think. And you live and learn, you get a chance. The great thing is I'm working with the same director and we can, you know, we're evolving and getting better and trying different things out. And not every film is, thank God, not every film is the same. So hopefully we can make a load of mistakes for the coming decade or more. I don't know, it's very difficult. I haven't, you know, sometimes I'm taken, you know, the truth is, I don't really notice the editing if the story is really good. And sometimes, like I'm a big fan of Thelma Shoemaker, obviously everybody in editing loves her work. She's an absolutely, you know, ballsy editor. She just takes no prisoners. I have to watch her films twice, once to enjoy the film, then I want to go and have a look at the plumbing. And I'm astonished at her decisions and how brave and bold she is. And I find that very inspirational.
And I did say that was going to be the last question, but since you've raised Schoonmaker, you know, the long relationship, obviously, with Scorsese and so on, what is your favourite bit of Thelma Schoonmaker's plumbing when you talk about that ballsy detail? As somebody asked earlier, one of your favourite moments in movies, is it a Schoonmaker moment?
Oh, you know, in Shutter Island, they take no prisoners. If you look at the continuity, it's an element of storytelling. There's deliberate breaks in continuity, and that means, you know, somebody's making a cigarette like that, and then, you know, you cut to another shot and it's down and they've got a white beard and time is obviously, you know, dislocated. But that discombobulated feeling and the kind of aggressiveness, there's a scene where the kind of, look out for a scene with a glass of water in front of somebody being interviewed. It's kind of amazing what it does. On a first viewing, you might not even notice it, but it's dislocating and it's an artistic choice. And I kind of love that. I absolutely love that. There's one in that little clip we showed then. One of the accidents of that little heptapod scene that I showed earlier was there was a horrible jump cut between Jeremy Renner and Jeremy Renner in different head positions. And normally I would smooth that out, but this, it just worked and signaled that there's something not as it seems. Love it.
Joe, it's now 7:30 UK time. I'm not quite sure what time it is where you are. Can't quite count it. 8 hours back. Joe, it's been a wonderful evening. Thank you very much for joining us, and some great insight. And I'm sure I'm not alone in waiting for and looking forward to June. You know, ever since I heard it was going to be made by Denis Villeneuve, I thought that's going to be worth seeing, and I hope. I can't wait. Mary, would you like to offer the vote of thanks?
I would love to. Thank you, Ed. And thank you all so much for being with us this evening. Thank you to Ed for your excellent chairing. And most of all, thank you to Joe for sharing your insights and expertise. Joe, I love that you put your early success down to being gobby and having a strong opinion, which is very good advice indeed, and perhaps something we should all take away with us, or at the very least, being confident to speak up. You also talked about the importance of passion in your work, something I hope that our students seek out and get to experience in their work too. And finally, it sounds like a dose of tenacity and a willingness to knock on doors is some other good advice that you gave us tonight. Thank you also for your great humour, your modesty, your integrity and your genius. These, I have to say, are often hallmarks of York graduates, and we're very grateful that you chose to apply your talents to the area of work that you have, and that we have all been so much enriched through your work. It's trite to say that these are unprecedented times, but we recognise that for our students who are seeking work experience and our graduates who are entering the world of work, that we must try to replicate some of the insights and opportunities that you would otherwise have pursued in normal times. And we really can replicate these experiences when our alumni willingly step in and give our time as Joe did tonight. It's definitely one of the upsides of our new Zoom world that we're able to connect with our alumni wherever they are in the world. And if you're a York student, I would also urge you to jump onto the York Profiles and Mentors platform and seek out other talented graduates who've offered their time to mentor our students. If you've enjoyed tonight's event, you may also be interested in some of our other events taking place over the next fortnight as part of our Open Lectures programme, the details of which can be found on screen now, as well as copied in the Zoom chat box below. We very much hope you'll continue to engage with our upcoming behind the scenes events, details of which can be found on our website, york.ac.uk/events, together with a full listing of this term's open lectures. Thank you again to Joe and to Ed and to all of you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you all again very soon. And for now, I wish you all a good evening. Thank you.